readiness training, sorry, that just popped up on my screen, for Black and Native folks primarily. We also, any other POC are welcome to participate, but our specific focus is for Black and Native. And the whole goal is to introduce them to jobs in the green sector. We define the green sector as very, very broad, right? For the purposes of entry-level work, right? If you're gonna be entry-level, then we need to be thinking much more broadly. So if you're even say the receptionist at a solar installation company, to us that counts as a green job. And then we do this through a combination of class time. So we spend 2 days in the classroom, teaching them some really basic environmental literacy and just connecting them to experts in the field so they get to see like what's that real world experience like? What is your, what does your day-to-day sound like and how did you get there? And then we have the other couple of days in the field where we visit potential employers, and that's the chance they get to like actually just go out there and do the work. Get out there, get their hands dirty and really see what that work feels like to see if it's something that is something they would like to do. And then the end goal is to connect the people that we're putting through our program to living wage green jobs, which ideally has a pathway for their career. And sometimes that's a job, sometimes it's an internship, sometimes it's helping them figure out what their career pathway is. When we started this program, it was intended for 18 to 25. And the reason this all came about was because EcoTrust and a couple of other local organizations did some research about equity in the urban forest and what access looked like for BIPOC folks to jobs, to just being out in the forest that are urban forest areas. And they found that, not surprisingly, Black, in particular, Black and Native folks were the ones with the least amount of access, right? They're the ones that had the most degradation in their neighborhoods, environmental degradation in their neighborhoods. So that's where this kind of focus came in on why Black and Native. And I don't know if y'all know, but Portland is very white. And so it is really obvious in the greens. I think in general in the green sector, just kind of this lack of diversity is very present. But particularly in Portland, we see it, we feel it, and it's definitely something we experience. So that's why we decided to do this program. So the collaborative, wanted to talk about the collaborative because it's a huge piece of what we do. When the study came out that we did that said, hey, you're missing a huge chunk of the workforce and some real opportunity to make a difference, we went, okay, so what do we, and I wasn't here for this part, I want to own that right now. I came in when this process was already established, and I got to fluff it out and make it fuller. But what had happened is that report came out, and so the first thing that EcoTrust did, because EcoTrust is a white-led org, was that they went out to community members, people that were already doing workforce development, people that were already in, doing any kind of workforce programming. And they said, especially those that were, BIPOC-led organizations and culturally specific organizations. And they said, what's going on? Is there a place for us? We bring a lot of resources. EcoTrust has been around for 30 years and they're very well established. And they've done a lot of work within Native communities here in the region. So, they wanted to make sure they were sitting down with the right people and getting that information. And what came from that was this partnership between some local agencies who said, yes, we see the value in what you're trying to do. Let's put this thing together and work together and form a collaborative. And so we chose to do that for a couple of reasons. One was because we wanted to be culturally specific and informed by the community for the communities we hope to serve. Also, these organizations, at least a couple of them, offer wraparound services and support, which was really crucial, and we knew that going in to the people that would be our participants. So we could connect them more easily to those. And then there was built-in recruiting and outreach pathways, which has been extremely helpful. And they're critical for feedback and insight. And so our current partners, and this has changed, we started the research that came out was in 2017. And so kind of the formulation of this and the finding of this process came about in 2018, 2017. And then by late 2018, early 2019, we started with our first cohorts for our Green Workforce Program. And the collection of partners that came together are the Wisdom of the Elders, which is a Native organization that does they do a lot of like critical habitat work, but they also do a lot of storytelling, which is really neat. Excuse me. NAYA, which is the Native American Youth Center. Self-Enhancement Inc., which focuses on Black community. We do a lot of after-school programming and family support services. And then the Blueprint Foundation, which is also serving Black community, mostly high school age kids, just trying to get them out to the environment and expose them to STEM careers. And then us at EcoTrust. And so one of the things, actually I'm gonna go back for a minute and hover here for a second. One of the things that was really important early on was that, as you see, like we were really intentional about going out to culturally specific organizations to partner with them, knowing that's what we would be working with. But it also became clear once we started doing the work that the people leading the program also needed to be from that community. And so my predecessor had grown up here in the, he's Black, grew up here in the neighborhoods. The people that we were, the teachers, we just became really intentional about who was teaching this program and who was leading this program. We wanted to make sure it reflected the communities we were serving. And so when they hired me, they did the same thing. They were very intentional about making sure it was a BIPOC person. I'm Native, I'm mixed race, I'm Native. My family is Tewa on my mom's side. They are from Opeawinge Pueblo in New Mexico. And I am very much a city native. I am an urban native. I've been back to the res many, many times, but I definitely am an urban native, which is different for if anybody knows. If anybody's native or anybody knows, you know what I mean. And so we've been just trying to be the whole time kind of just maintaining, like, whenever we have guest speakers that come into our space for the program, right? As often as we can, we're trying to make sure that those are BIPOC folks as well. And like I said, it's super white here in Portland, so that's not always the case. It's not always doable. But, you know, taking them to businesses that are owned or at least have, you know, BIPOC representation so that they're seeing themselves, you know, in this thing, because these are for most part young people that are just kind of out of high school and haven't found quite, you know, that job pathway yet. And so what's come out of this has been some really great learning opportunities for myself, for everybody involved. And so my suggestions here are bounce your ideas off your collaborators regularly. That feedback and their input is invaluable, especially if you're not from the community. I can talk about Native community all day, but when it comes to talking about Black community, that's not my lived experience. I don't have that. So and plus if they're working in community like some of ours are, right, then they're just deeply connected in a way that I'm not. And so their input, information is just completely, you know, the most invaluable thing that we have as part of this relationship that we have in this collaborative. Form a community of practice locally to more holistically meet the needs of the communities you serve. We've tried really hard as this program's expanded, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we've tried to be really intentional about the pathways that we're creating in our program and in the relationships we're building with other programs and organizations and government. And, you know, it's really multifaceted. And like I was saying earlier, representation is vital. If you're working with BIPOC, queer, other marginalized folks, right? That's who should be leading your programs. I can't say that strongly enough. Any other BIPOC folks, there's definitely content in here that's going to probably really resonate with you that you've been saying for a long time, which is those who, you know, the communities we're serving, they need to see that representation and that leadership and who's you know, doing the programs. And then connection to professional mentors. This was a big one that we've really pushed for in all the work that we've done. For my program, I'm generally the mentor, but so is the person who is, you know, we've got multiple people within our program. It could be the driver that's taking the people out to field sites. It's kind of whoever they connect with. In our program, we let it be a little more organic. kind of whoever that youth connects with, that's who's going to be the one that intersects with them a little bit more. But I reach out to everybody. I annoy them regularly. I follow up with everybody regularly. But having that mentorship piece is a huge help. Barriers. And some of this, like I said, some of this may be common sense for some people, but sometimes it's not. And I think this is one that you really learn as you go, right? What those barriers are. Hopefully, if you're from those communities that you're serving, then you have a pretty good handle on what to expect as far as barriers. But basically the big question, the big thing is, don't assume you know what people have. Don't assume they have access to basic needs, even if you pay them. We pay them a stipend, but we also know they're not getting that stipend the first day they start class, right? They're getting that stipend a couple of weeks in, just like they would if they were in a job. So it's critical to us. We knew up front that we would need to provide things like transportation. Because we're going from classrooms to field sites, we need to have transportation for most of them. We don't want to assume, especially as young people, that everybody's going to have access to a car. And the bus system's okay, but there's, in our region, but if we're going out to a farm that's 25 miles outside of Portland, then the bus system doesn't really matter anymore. So we knew we'd have to do that, provide things like transportation. But what became really obvious up front was, we should probably be providing them lunch as well, right? Like there's a bunch of things that start popping up and you go, oh, there's, you start noticing, oh, maybe they're not eating because they don't have the money to, they don't have those resources yet. And even if we do pay them, they may still not have the resources, right? Because we don't know what people's needs are and what they're accounting for at home and who they're caring for at home. And other things that have come up have been like daycare, but we've been trying to meet those needs. COVID was a really great example of this, right? Like we didn't know what they would need. Last year was like, as many of you experienced, just who knew what was happening, right? It was all up in the air. So trying to plan our cohorts last year was super challenging because we meet in person. And the teachers recognized that for the communities we serve, that it meant, a lot of them live in mixed generational households. And so to have somewhere quiet to be on their, laptop to do these classes would be really a struggle for a lot of people in our program. So how can we do this in person? So we did a lot of planning and backup planning just to make sure, that people could attend. And at one point, I just went out and said, hey, who has laptops, who has access? That way, in case we need to switch to work from home and, something happens, we can do that. And everybody's already ready. So we bought computers this last year for people to have in case they needed it. And then if you're engaging community partners and your program implementation team, is from the community serve, then ideally you have like I said, you have a better handle on what some of these barriers are. And just kind of asking the question, what do your participants need to be successful? And that's going to really change from person to person. We see so much variance just within our program with the level of workforce readiness, that is one of the biggest barriers that I've seen personally in doing this work is just, and it can seem so basic for anybody that's been working for a while, but just, when you're sick, you call in, you don't no-show. If you're struggling or you need help with whatever it is to get to your job, communicating with the employer, right? Communicating with your boss is just, you need to do that instead of avoid that. Showing up on time, that's a big one. Showing up on time, just be there. And then, making sure that that your needs are being met and being able to have hard conversations like interpersonal, on the job, interpersonal stuff always comes up. You're not going to get along with everybody that you work with. So, what are you doing to, what are we teaching them? What are they getting from this? So sometimes it's the soft skills. More often than not in my program, it's soft skills that we're really working with. How to navigate space in a white dominant field when you are a BIPOC person. That is another huge conversation that we have about cultural code switching and the fact that, unfortunately, it's what a lot of us do. So there's a lot of soft skills, there's a lot of hard skills that we're teaching, but basically don't make assumptions, have those conversations. I'm gonna take a drink. Okay, so some lessons learned, some the hard way. This is an iterative process. Be willing to adapt and respond and change. You know, this kind of ties into the always have a backup plan, what can go wrong well. Last year in Portland, we had some really, really terrible wildfires just outside of kind of where our cities are. And the smoke made it so that we couldn't actually leave our houses because the smoke was so dense. And it was like that for about a week. It was really, really, really awful. You know, like we're taping up doors and windows and sealing it shut as much as we could because it was so toxic outside. We were in mid cohort when that happened, which was really hard to do. But because I put in that foresight and just thought about, planning for COVID, I was able to go, oh, we're just going to do class from home today. Here's your Zoom links, everybody show up, and we can do this all virtually. And luckily we were able to reschedule, I had a couple of days of buffer in our schedule. So we were able to make up our one day that we should have been outside. But just be willing to adapt and respond because, and changes happen. Another big thing that's happened, like I said, our age range used to be 18 to 25, knowing that that was kind of what they call the opportunity youth, right? People that are disconnected from school, but they're not in a job yet. How do we get to those folks and help them get into careers or get into an educational pathway? And so in conversation with my collaborative partners at our meeting about a month ago, I was saying, I think we should follow through is really, really not the best for 18 to 25-year-olds when it comes to helping them find jobs. Turns out that's a huge barrier, is connecting them for a host of reasons. I mean, I think that part of it is when you're 20 years old, it's really easy to be like, I'm just going to hang out with my friends today. I'd rather not apply for that job or show up for that interview. There's also legitimate barriers that get in the way, right? I don't have the bus money. I don't have this. I can't get there. I don't have someone to watch my child. So for a host of reasons, their follow through is not the best. And so I was suggesting maybe we extend our age range so that we could get older folks in there. Because what we've seen is that even just a little bit older, that 26, 27, they start being a little bit more determined and more proactive about finding work. And they want the connections we can give because we have, managed to create a lot of connections with employers. So I have jobs waiting and I have people that aren't applying for them, which is a struggle. And when I said that, my collaborators said, we're seeing a lot of people come in for wraparound services that are older, that are in their 30s and maybe 40s, people that are used to being in the workforce, but because of COVID, no longer have work and they're having trouble getting back into work. So they want to work, they're there. Why don't we just take it away, get rid of that age cap? And I said, brilliant, perfect, right? It was sometimes, I think my lesson learned there is like sometimes that change, and if you're the one that has the power to make those decisions, can be really easy. Don't make it harder for yourself, right? Nobody else needed to give me input other than my collaborators, and I'm the one in that instance that had the power to say, let's do it. That makes a lot of sense. Not only can we increase our impact and get to a lot more people and help connect people to these jobs that I've got literally waiting over here for folks, but it also helps with, say, my grant funding, because we're a nonprofit and that's where our money comes from, is to say we're meeting, what we're doing better with connecting people to jobs, because it seems to be that older people are better at connecting to jobs and following through and doing that part. So be adaptive. Set clear expectations up front for participants. This has been really important for us. Again, because I think in part because of the age group, but just setting clear expectations. I swear every time I get through a cohort or a year and I look back and I go, okay, this one thing is really frustrating, and realize that it comes back to me. And if I had been more clear up front about an expectation, that, I could have saved myself a lot of grief. And so I tend to be very clear. And not only am I clear, like in the interview process about expectations, say no phones, because we're in a classroom a lot and I want people to be present. Or if we're on work sites, you really need to be present. So, don't do that. This is not accepted. This is not accepted. And just constantly reiterating like what expectations are. And then they always have a backup plan. What can go wrong? Well, it does. Provide what they need. A huge thing. I never thought I would spend as much time as I do thinking about water and access to water in this role. Very young people, and maybe it happens with older people too. I don't know how many of you guys are bad about this. I always have a water bottle with me. Everywhere I go, anything I do, my water bottle is with me. Especially if you're out in the field, you're going to want to make sure you have a water bottle for the day, and they're terrible. So far, this has been the one item that people can't seem to remember to bring is a water bottle out to the field sites where they're going to be working hard in the sunshine most of the time. So providing what they need, kind of like the lunch, we realized we needed to, provide lunch for them if we wanted them to actually be able to show up and participate, the way we were wanting them to, and to be nourished and to be, taken care of. And so in my case, water, buying water bottles, reusable water bottles, but then also having the backup of the disposable water bottles because somebody's going to forget it. So just really thinking about and learning and adapting and realizing if you're doing things like this, what do those folks need? So let me check my notes, see if there's anything I was hoping to get to before I got to this part. So related programs, one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was just thinking about the pathway. If you're creating programs or if you already have programs, thinking about the pathway you're part of. So in our case, right, initially we're this kind of middle pathway. There's green and STEM programs and STEAM programs within the schools, all the way from, grade school a lot of times up into high school, where we see a lot more of that. Then they get out and then they could be part of like our program. And then after that, where do they go, right? Is there an internship that they connect to? Is there another space? Is there further education? Depending on what their path may be, but how does our particular program plug into this pathway of what we're trying to achieve? For us, it's getting BIPOC folks into green jobs. So who's along in that pathway? And so we've worked really hard within our program, within our collaborators, recognizing there's a need for building those relationships in our community, building it with workforce development, not just specifically green workforce development, but just workforce development in general. Working with the schools, right? And just kind of reaching all those tendrils out and creating this community of practice that says, we know. It was really helpful because it really came together. We saw it really come together when COVID happened, because there was a lot of us saying, what are you doing? What are you doing for your program? Are you guys meeting in person? Are you adapting all your information to being in an online format? How are you handling these changes that the world and this pandemic has thrown at us? And then just kind of working together to figure out what works best for our programs. And it was really, really helpful, like on a personal and professional level, to just have that community to support you and to be able to touch base with, which was really great. So what's happened since I've been in this role is because there's a bunch of us already thinking in terms of pathways, we've gotten involved in a lot of other programs that are similar to ours. I mean, my reasoning has always been, if it directly benefits the graduates of my program, then that's the perfect reason for me to be involved in creating new programs that would benefit them specifically. So with a few of the collaborators from my program, we've ended up on these advisory boards to help create these other programs you see here. So PGE is the Portland General Electric. It's our electrical supplier for the area. They created a program called Project Zero. We were there from the beginning. So there's multiple of us that are in our collaborative that are also on these advisory boards. This one is, so PGE, it's, the local utility. 6 months, they get 6 months with, and this was just to kind of showcase, before I get on that track, to showcase how we can be working with government, with nonprofits, with professional organizations, right, with private industry, with the city. There's a lot of different ways this can show up. So I wanted to give these examples of some different collaboration setups, I guess. So PGE Project Zero, it's a 6-month internship. And what they did is PGE, they kind of like house the money. They're the ones that take care of paying everybody, but the internships aren't with them because you need such a high level of expertise, right? You need to, have skills, and most of the time, if it's not like internal, they're doing all this electrical work around the city. So you really got to have those trade skills, which folks that are coming into this don't have because it's just an internship. So what they did is they're the employer of record, and then they're kind of parsing out money to these nonprofits. And so the interns spend 6 months with a local nonprofit, building their skills based on their interests. And then the goal is just like the goal for my program, which is to connect them to jobs, right? Then we have Forest Park Conservancy. Forest Park here is about, I think it's like 27 square mile park. It's a massive, massive park in the middle of downtown Portland. It's huge. And so many, many years ago, in order to conserve the area around the park, which is extremely wealthy, it's mostly bordered by white folks that have been there for a long time, and they're very, very big houses. And that's who kind of started this. And so Forest Park recognized they were, basically they needed to do some serious equity and diversity within their own organization to help and do better in our community. And so they started a 1-year internship where folks could come in and they could either do things like work with Forest Park Conservancy and work along the trails doing trail maintenance, but it wasn't just Forest Park. When you came into this, they hired, I think, 4 or 5 people, and they themselves created, this gets very confusing. I hope I'm explaining this well enough. Feel free to ask me questions when this is over. So what happens is we've got the advisory board for any of these programs. And most of them have multiple other partners they're working with that are implementing the program. And so in the case of Forest Park Conservancy, you could get the 1-year internship with Forest Park, but they also had internships that worked with Columbia Slough. No, that wasn't it. There's too many even in my brain. There's the Columbia Slough Watershed. There's multiple other programs where they can be part of East Multnomah Water and Soil District. And so they got these opportunities to either be housed with one of those organizations for the year. What I thought was really neat about this program is they spent 4 of their days outside doing this on the ground work, but they spent 1 day inside doing office work. So they were building their office skills as well. So they were learning how to use, Microsoft Office. They were learning how to be in an office environment, and just getting this really, really well-rounded experience to see what it was like to be in those roles. And then currently we're working with the city of Portland, or I'm working with, this one is just me, working with the city of Portland, if their Bureau of Environmental Sustainability, they do a lot of the water quality stuff in the area. And so what we're developing is a 2-year training program that would be limited term, but we wanted to give them a really long time. Our goal, the collaborators and I, our goal through many of these programs is to give them as much time as these people that we're working with, these organizations that we're working with are willing to give them. PGE was only willing to do 6 months. Forest Park said, let's do a year. And City of Portland is being really cool and was like, let's give them 2 years, right? Let's make that first year this kind of training period where they're really, we're really giving them a chance to grow and learn. And then, after that first year, we're going to rotate them up and say, okay, now you're like just one of the crew, right? And the whole time you're one of the crew that's doing this work, but really getting them that experience so that when they're done, they can put that on a resume, they can get hired. If it's not within the organization they're already working for, then it makes it so they've got some really solid experience underneath them and they're building a really great resume for themselves. And the one thing that we made sure as an advisory board that all these programs share is access to mentorship, somebody who is not their direct report, someone that they could go to, ideally another BIPOC person, that they could go to even sometimes outside of their organization that would just be their professional mentor. Connections to wraparound services. So even once they weren't in our programs, they still knew they could reach out to us and we could connect them if they needed, help with their electricity, rental assistance, things like that. Job placement assistance, like I've mentioned before, this is a huge piece of all the things that we're trying to do. Is at the end of the day, we're trying to get BIPOC folks into green jobs. And so we need to be a huge part of that. So we're building lots of relationships there. And then through all of these, there's a ton of networking opportunities, right? They're meeting employers they could work for, they're job shadowing, right? They're getting lots of opportunities to network with other professionals in the industry and showing them how they can do that, and to really help them put their, especially the youth, aren't always as experienced with really showcasing what they're capable of and putting themselves out there. Yeah, and you know, wanting to be the person that goes up to that person and starts talking and asking the questions. So really creating an atmosphere where they feel like they can do that, and that's expected and wanted. And I think, yeah, this is us masked up last year out in the fields doing our thing. I'm going to stop sharing and take a drink of water because that was a lot of talking.
So I'll turn back over to Vernon, but if people have questions, you can just, we can see you all, so you can raise your hand, Vernon can see you all, or you can put it in the chat and I'll make sure that it's caught if Vernon can't see it because he's talking.
Yeah, so I just realized my name on here is not my name. I should change my name. Yeah, if you have any questions, we'll give you a minute or two to think about it.
Hey, yeah, this is Savannah in Cincinnati. And I was wondering, are there any certifications that folks can get through your program that you found to be particularly helpful for this continual pathway?
Yeah, there's a couple that we've talked about, and it's interesting because, you know, we've got, I'm so thankful for like all the people that come and talk to our classes because they educate me all the time on, you know, what's needed in their field. And so a big one is called the HAZWOPER, which is, you know, I don't know if people have heard of this, but it's basically a 1-week training that they go through to deal with hazardous materials. Because there's a couple of places that we do with like bioremediation and cleanup sites and things like that. So that's a big one. And they've pushed, you know, our green construction guy has really pushed like any certifications that you can get that the employer provides, do that, right? Like anytime employers are providing this kind of stuff, make sure that they're the ones paying for it. So it's not coming out of your own pocket, because there are a lot of them that may not even advertise that they pay for that, but if you ask them, they will. So knowing that they have access to that. For us, we only have 5 weeks with them. So what we offer is, yeah, you know, when I came on, they were really touting this as like a pre-apprenticeship. And I said, no, we're not teaching them anything specific enough. This is just workforce readiness training, right? This is just like an education and an exposure to what's possible. Like you don't have to go and work at the McDonald's. You can actually do something that's fulfilling to yourself and gives back to your community and offers you a job pathway. So not so much for ours, but I can absolutely connect them to things. Yeah.
Hi, Teresa. My name is Matt. Appreciate the presentation. It was very interesting. The question I had was relating to the founding of the collective or the collaborative. I understand you weren't, you know, you were brought on after it was initially founded, but do you have any insights or information about kind of where the collaborative kind of emerged from? Was there an explicit demand in the community from, say, the BIPOC community? Were they involved in the formation process for it? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so early on what they did was they convened about, I think, like 50 local organizations. A lot of them were doing work like we're doing, right? Something similar. Honestly, a lot of it was more like pre-apprenticeship or internships that they were already doing.